Hi, Holyfrog here. So today I want to make a video on talent builds, because I do get a lot of questions from people wondering what's my build like, and how should I spec as a protection paladin. And the answer to that is there is no single best build. There's a lot of talent points that you should get, and there's a lot of optional talent points. So rather than just giving a build to everyone asking, I'm just gonna make a video on it instead. So the goal of this video is that when I'm done, hopefully you will understand the talents well enough that you can make your own build, and you will know exactly what to pick in every given scenario. So first off, paladins have three different trees. And obviously there's the protection tree, which is your main tree that you want to spend points in. But you also have your holy tree and your retribution tree. So I'm going to start off with the holy tree first, because that's really the most clear-cut tree. You always want to stick at least 11 points in that. And the reason for this being that you get Consecration. And Consecration is really your main ability as a protection paladin, especially in 5-man dungeons, because it allows you to deal holy damage to every single enemy that you're fighting at the same time. And not only does this holy damage get increased by Righteous Fury, which means you will generate a substantial amount of threat, it will also do a lot of damage. So your contribution to the group is actually huge when it comes to damage compared to any other tank. So first off, to get to Consecration we need to stick 10 points somewhere else. And on the first tier in the tree you have your choice between Divine Strength and Divine Intellect. And now Divine Strength increases your strength by 10%. Now what this does, it increases your white damage. And that's going to be your single target damage only, and it's not increased by Righteous Fury. Some people like getting this, and you will hit harder, and will also increase your block value. The thing with strength though, is it takes 20 strength to get one block value. And that means, at least in pre-raid gear, and for a long time with raiding gear, you just won't have enough strength that you'll actually get any block value out of this talent. So a lot of guides will say that you need to pick this for the block value, but I don't agree. I don't think that does anything for you really. The other option you have is Divine Intellect. And Divine Intellect increases your intellect by 10%. Now the thing with this one is a lot of your tank gear won't actually have intellect on it, so it won't be that huge of an increase to your mana. But I prefer this talent myself because having some additional mana means you can actually cast a couple more spells, 1 or 2 more spells in a fight, which can make the difference. And instead of doing slightly more white damage, which again is like to a single target, your intellect allows you to cast, say, another Consecration or a Holy Shield. So again, it's not super important which of these talents you pick, it's really down to personal preference. I prefer the intellect, other people prefer the strength. So once you've made your choice here, we can go down to the next tier. And here we will have Spiritual Focus or Improved Seal of Righteousness. Now Spiritual Focus is not going to do anything for your tanking. It just gives your spells a chance to not lose casting time when you take damage. And this can be pretty good if you, say, AoE grind, or you're in a scenario where you need to heal yourself, say the healer died, and you have to get an emergency heal off. But usually, I mean, if you're tanking a lot of mobs, you're not going to get a heal off anyway, and you're just going to die. So you can pick this if you want to play more solo. I don't recommend this for tanking actual dungeons or raids. Instead, your other options here will be Improved Seal of Righteousness, which increases your Seal of Righteousness damage by 15%. The thing with this talent though is it does not scale with spell power, it only increases the base damage of your seal. But in the case of, say, Judgment of Righteousness, it will result in a 30 damage or so increase. And that's still multiplied by Righteous Fury and still a pretty decent threat increase. So especially the way I use the Judgment is like my Judgment is used as a kind of similar to a taunt. So if I lose aggro, I'll judge, and that usually is enough to get the mob back to me. And having it do slightly more damage, that's gonna be good. Same with the seal, just having the seal do slightly more damage on every attack. It's gonna increase your single target threat whenever you're hitting a boss or hitting some mob. So I recommend getting this, but other people have other preferences, and there's really no right or wrong option here. How I think about it though is that as a paladin, your threat is kinda on the low side. It's not as good as a warrior or a druid. So getting everything you can out of your abilities is pretty crucial if you want to hold threat against well-geared DPS. So this would be my choice every time. And that leads us to our final talent in the holy tree, which is Consecration. And this is something you should always pick unless you really know what you're doing. In which case, if you're making a very specific build for, say, only tanking a single target where the target does not have to die really fast and you don't need the extra threat, then yeah, you can spend the points somewhere else. But for the majority of your tanking, and for 5 man especially, never skip this. So next up we have the protection tree. And this is really your main tree as a paladin tank. And on first tier we have Improved Devotion Aura and Redoubt. Now Improved Devotion Aura increases the bonus armor of your Devotion Aura by 25%. This may sound good, but it's only like 185 armor. So the question you have to ask yourself is 185 armor something you want to spend 5 talent points on? My opinion is it's not, and you should never pick this. The reason being, as a tank, your Retribution Aura is doing holy damage, which scales with Righteous Fury, which means that most of the time you're going to be running Retribution Aura anyway, and you won't get anything out of this extra armor. Now Redoubt, on the other hand, after you get crit, you get 30% chance to block for the next 5 attacks. And this may seem counterintuitive because as a tank, you probably heard you want to stack defense in order to reduce the amount of crits you get. But the thing here is you can never really reach the crit cap. You can, but you need gear that's very specialized and will also reduce your other overall stats by a lot. Now for raids, there are times where you want to be defense capped, but for the majority of the time, and especially in the 5-man dungeon, it's not really something that's necessary at all. In fact, it's kind of counterproductive because getting crit less and not getting the readout procs are gonna lower your threat quite dramatically. And the reason for this is that as a paladin, you have a lot of synergy with your blocks. So blocking an attack is gonna give you holy damage from Blessing of Sanctuary, and it's gonna make it easier for you to spend your holy shield charges. So this is something I would always pick in any build, and it's also leading up to shield specialization later, which I'm going to talk about. Now for the second tier, you have precision, you have guardian's favor, and you have toughness. And precision increases your chance to hit with melee weapons by 3%, if you put 3 points in it. And this is good because landing more melee hits is gonna result in more Seal of Righteousness damage, and it's also gonna give you more mana from having judged a Judgment of Wisdom on the target. And especially as a dwarf, this talent is even more important because as a human, you will have +5 to your mace and your sword skill. And what this means is against higher level targets, it's effectively a bonus hit chance. So a human with a sword or a mace need less hit than a dwarf to hit cap, which reduces the value of this talent. But it's still a good talent because as a paladin, you have some real trouble reaching the hit cap. Because the available gear for a paladin tank is just more poorly optimized than a warrior, and it's harder to get your hit from pieces like, say, the warrior tier 1 set. Their gloves, they have hit on them. And there's other pieces like Band of Valkyria, which I doubt you're gonna get that as a paladin. And that has 2% hit. And warriors also get to use other pieces like the wrist guards of True Flat from Major Domo, for example. So a warrior have a much easier time reaching hit cap. And this talent is great to alleviate some of the issues with hit. So this is something I would always pick if you're serious about tanking. Of course, if you're only tanking 5 mans, and then it's not really a big deal. You can get away with not having this if you prefer having other talents. But 3% hit, that's really good for only 3 talent points. Next up, you have Guardian's Favor. Reduces the cooldown of Blessing of Protection by 60 seconds per point, up to a total of 2 minutes. It also increases the duration of Blessing of Freedom, which is still useful, just not as much as the Blessing of Protection cooldown. And the reason for this is Paladins don't have a taunt. So what you can do instead if someone pulls aggro is you can cast Blessing of Protection on them, and that will temporarily remove them from the threat table of the mob, and that will also mean the boss or the mob is going to return to you, and it will give you 10 seconds to build enough threat that the mob is going to stick on you once the Blessing of Protection expires. So having a lower cooldown on this, it's very useful, especially in 5-man, but it can also be pretty great in raids. Our last talent here is Toughness. Increases the armor value from items by 2% per point. And it may not sound like a lot, but keep in mind that armor is the only real way you have of directly reducing the physical damage dealt by mobs. So by stacking this up, it will go up to 10%, and that'll actually give you a sizable decrease in damage. So I advise getting some points in this, because it will reduce the damage you take from physical hits against you. And if you're not defense capped anyway, it's also going to reduce the damage you take from crits by quite a lot, because crits are double damage of regular melee hits. So reducing this by a small percentage is actually going to add up on the big crits. Now that you have some points here, we can jump to the next tier. And here you have Improved Righteous Fury. This increases the amount of threat generated by a Righteous Fury spell by 50% with 3 points. Because the base threat modifier in Righteous Fury is 60%, 50% of 60 is 30, so it's going to increase the total threat you deal by holy spells by 90%. And this talent is really not optional if you want to do any kind of tanking, because it makes a huge difference, and it's the single biggest threat increase you can get from any talent. So you put 3 points in this, and that will leave you with some choices for the next tier. So what you have here is Blessing of Kings. This is something you can pick. It increases your total stats by 10% on everyone. So this is a good choice if you like having all the blessings. In a raid though, some other paladin should always have this anyway. So you may want to choose to use the point for something else. In which case you can say you go more armor instead, or you pick shield specialization or something else. It's really up to you. Personally, I like having kings because that means as a paladin you have all the blessings, and that increases your value to the raid. So next we have shield specialization. Increases the amount of damage absorbed by your shields by 30%. And 30% is about a 12 damage increase if you're wearing a blue shield, because they usually have 40 block value. It also has some synergy with your strength, and your strength increases the amount of block you do by 1 point per 20 strength. So you can just calculate this yourself based on the amount of strength you have and the block value of your shield. In pre-raid gear, it's going to result in a 10 to 15 increase in your block value. So against the raid boss, it's not going to make a huge difference. But if you're tanking trash, lower level mobs, like say in a dungeon, and you're tanking big packs, then the extra 12-15 damage really adds up. So this is a talent I advise picking, just for this reason. So once you have this, you can see now we're getting to the next tier, where you have Improved Hammer of Justice and Improved Concentration Aura. Improved Concentration Aura has the same problem as the Spiritual Focus, which is that you can't really use that as a tank. So this is more of a PvP talent. And if you play a Holy Paladin going down the prot tree, this is also something you can pick up. I would not advise picking this as a tank, because it's very unlikely you're actually going to get any use out of it. Improved Hammer of Justice, on the other hand, decreases the cooldown of your Hammer of Justice spell by 15 seconds. That's when talented fully into it. This can be good for interruption in dungeons, because Hammer of Justice is really your only interrupt if you don't have Repentance, which you can never get as a tank anyway. I personally have never really needed this talent. I find the 1 minute cooldown is more than enough in dungeons, because that will allow me to interrupt once per pack. So as long as you're smart with your interrupt, and you interrupt the right spell, that should work. And I just prefer using these points somewhere else. So what I like to do here is I like to just stick them in Toughness. You could put them in Anticipation, But the problem with that is it increases your defense skill by 2 per point. And this is like a bit counterintuitive because you actually want to get crit for your readout procs. And I also think the value of this talent is pretty low. It has the same problem as the improved Devotion Aura, which is the 5% bonus armor on Devotion Aura. It's just not a good use of whole talent point. And same here, you get 2 defense per talent point. And let me put it this way, a single piece of gear can have 10 to 15 defense on it. Which is like having 5 or more talent points on a single piece of gear. So getting 2 additional defense for a talent point is not going to make a huge difference. And I think you only really should pick this talent if you're tanking something where you need to be defense capped. Because then you can spare the points from not having to get Reckoning. So my choice would always be Toughness. Once you have some points in that, then you can go down to the next tier where you have Blessing of Sanctuary. A Blessing of Sanctuary, first off, is a prerequisite to Holy Shield. So you always want to pick this. The highest rank of Blessing of Sanctuary reduces the damage you take from an attack by 24. It also deals holy damage whenever you block. The holy damage is going to increase your threat, but the damage reduced, that's going to really add up, especially again if you're tanking a lot of mobs, say in a dungeon, or raid trash like the Blackmailer Suppression Room. Taking just less damage from every single mob is really going to add up. And this is really the Paladin's version of defensive stance, because we don't have a defensive stance like warriors do, where they take 10% less damage from everything. Instead they have Blessing of Sanctuary. In some cases, the damage reduction from this can actually surpass the one from defensive stance. But against bosses and things that hit really hard, defensive stance is just straight up better. But Sanctuary is still a good blessing. Most of the time you want to be using this when you're tanking. So to get further down the tree from here, we need to pick some of these talents, like either Reckoning, get more toughness, anticipation, or just fill out the stun. Now Reckoning, it's a bit of a weird talent. Again, it requires you to be crit, which is not good if you're defense capped. So it doesn't synergize well with anticipation. And it doesn't synergize well with having a high defense on your gear. But it does synergize well with having low to medium defense. So you get readout procs for your defense and you get Reckoning charges. Now the thing with Reckoning, it says it will give you an extra attack after getting crit. And a lot of people seem to think that this talent will just, you get crit, and then next time you strike you're going to do 2 attacks. This is not really how it works. How it works is, once you get crit, you will attack instantly. Your next attack just comes right away. Similar to how parry works. So what this means is if you're tanking a huge pack of mobs and you get crit a lot, you're just gonna attack really, really fast. And this can be great if you have, say, Seal of Wisdom up. And that will give you a lot of mana from just attacking really fast. Also, if you have Judgment of Wisdom, it's gonna give you even more. Against a single target though, with Seal of Righteousness up, you won't get crit that much to make a huge difference, but it's still gonna increase the threat you deal. So it's a good talent, I advise picking it, especially for 5-man. For raids, the value of this goes down somewhat as you won't get crit a lot. So it's really up to you if you feel you need the extra threat. I would have to add though that this is an amazing solo talent. So if you're playing solo and you want to grind mobs or something like that, having this is actually going to help you out a lot. And this is because you can utilize a sit macro to stack up charges. And unlike a private server, you cannot sit to get a stack. Instead you have to stand up right as the mob hits you. And there's macros for this, and it takes some practice to do, but it's pretty reliable. And if you just want to use this to grind mobs or to go kill someone in PvP, it's a pretty good choice. And for general tanking and 5-mans, I think it's absolutely amazing. And for raid bosses and single targets, it's still pretty good, but it's not that great. But if you want to pick this, pick this. If you don't like this talent, pick something else. The choice is really yours. So I'm gonna get 5 points in this, and then we're gonna move down to the next tree. And here we have one-handed weapon specialization. This increases the damage you deal with one-handed melee weapons by 2% per point, up to a maximum of 10%. And if you tanked in Burning Crusade, this talent is somewhat different there. In Burning Crusade, this will increase all the damage you do by 5%, as long as you're wearing a one-handed weapon. In Vanilla, it doesn't work like this. It will only increase the damage you actually deal with the weapon, as well as your seals, by 10%. So a 10% increase to your Seal of Righteousness is still pretty good, because that means you will actually be doing more threat. And I'm gonna go by the same logic that I used for improved Seal of Righteousness, which is your base threat as a paladin is pretty low to begin with. So I just like this talent just to get as much threat as I can out of my abilities. Once you have this talent, we unlock Holy Shield. And Holy Shield, along with Consecration, is your main tanking ability as a protection paladin. Now what this talent does is every time you block, you're gonna, first off, you're gonna do holy damage. This holy damage causes 20% additional threat, and will also increase your chance to block by 30%. And this just straight up stacks with readout, so if you get both readout and Holy Shield up, you'll have a 60% increased chance to block. And that makes it very unlikely that you're gonna take a crushing blow, and in some cases it's gonna stop you from getting crit as well. So this is an excellent talent. And the thing here is the block chance increase is the same for all the ranks of the spell. So what I like to do is I like to have rank 1 on my bars, and I like to have rank 3 on my bars. And I'll just use rank 1 whenever I need a defense, and I'll use rank 3 if I need more threat. So say in a dungeon, I pull 5-6 mobs, I'll activate the highest rank Holy Shield, just to get some initial threat. Once I have established solid threat, I will just use rank 1 for the block chance. And this is an excellent talent to pick as a paladin tank for 5-mans, because it does do a lot of threat per point of mana spent. And it's going to make you very mana efficient when tanking. Now for raids, it's obviously a good choice because the extra block is going to reduce the damage you take, and it's going to give you extra threat. Now in a raid though, it's hard to use up all these charges until you start getting more block on your gear. But what you can do is you still want it up so you get the extra block chance. Just rank 1 at least. It really depends on how much threat you do. But you can also pair it like for 5-man. Say you get crit and then you pair it with your readout procs. So you get a total of 60% increase to your block. And that will make the chance that you actually use all the charges really high. And if you get to use all the charges on this, it's a very efficient spell, like mana wise. I also like it for solo grinding, because then I'll do the same thing. I'll pull like 3-4 mobs, I'll wait for a crit, and then I'll use Holy Shield. And it becomes just a very efficient source of damage if you're grinding. So that was our protection tree, and we're gonna move over to the retribution tree next. The retribution tree is really your most simple tree. It's just a support tree for the other trees as a tank. And in the first tier, your choices are Blessing of Might, which you never want to get, and Benediction. And Benediction, if you're going down this tree, you always pick this, because it reduces the mana cost of your Judgment and Seal spells by 15%. And this results in about 30 mana for the seals. And for Judgments, it's not going to be that much, but it still helps. And what this essentially does is it lets you cast a couple more seals and a couple more judgments over the course of a boss fight, or just regular trash pulls, which makes you somewhat more mana efficient. And having more mana available is never a bad thing. But then it leads us to the next tier, where you get Improved Judgment or Deflection. Now Improved Judgment decreases the cooldown of your judgment spell by 2 seconds. So your base cooldown is 10 seconds, and with the talent now it's 8 seconds. And obviously this increases your threat per second, as you can use judgment more often. And it also allows you to target switch easier by lowering the cooldown and making it easier to put a judgment such as Light and Wisdom and Crusader on a secondary mob. This is obviously useful if you're going down this tree. The other option is Deflection, increases your chance to parry. And here you can actually get a full 4 points. that means not getting the judgment. Instead you get 4 points in deflection, 4% parry, and at least in pre-raid gear you have about 8-9% chance to parry. So increasing that by 4% is actually quite a lot. And the thing with parry is you're not just avoiding the damage, you're also speeding up your next attack by, I believe, 40% of the remaining time left on your swing. So not only does parry decrease the damage you take, it also increases the amount of threat you do by letting you attack faster, similar to how Reckoning works. So both of these talents are good options, and if you want to, you could also do 2 points in improved judgment and 2 points in parry, or you could just get either one and you can stick the remaining points in something in the holy tree or the protection tree. So now the last thing I want to touch on before I end this video is the build that I am currently using, because I do get questions about this. And this build is kind of a hybrid build. What I have is I went down to Holy Shield in protection tree, so this is what my talent build looks like. And then I get Healing Light and Illumination, and I do 1 point in improved lay on hands. And this build will allow me to heal 5-man dungeons just fine, assuming I have the gear for it. And I also use this build to heal Molten Core, which of course is not the optimal healing build for Molten Core, obviously, because you're lacking a few talents like the Holy Power, Divine Favor, and you can't get Blessing of Wisdom, you can't get Lasting Judgments, and you can't get 2 points in improved lay on hands. But you do get Holy Shield, so you're still an excellent tank for 5-mans, and you can heal anything just fine. So I plan on switching to a deeper Holy build for raids when Blackwing Lair releases, but just for Molten Core I think this build works just fine. And the contents just is not hard enough that you really need to be deeper in Holy. That being said though, if you want to be as effective of a healer as possible, there is another build you can use, which is this build. And here you don't get Holy Shield. Instead you have Blessing of Sanctuary and Improved Righteous Fury. And this is going to let you tank 5-mans just fine. Your threat is going to be somewhat lower without the Holy Shield, especially on smaller packs and on bosses. And you may have to drink slightly more, but your threat is still going to be fine, because you have Consecration, and you have Improved Righteous Fury, and you have all your defensive talents. And with this build, what you get is Divine Favor, you get Holy Power, then you can get Lasting Judgments or Improved Blessing of Wisdom. And these two talents will just be something you have to discuss with the other paladins in your guild. Normally, you know, only one paladin will get Lasting Judgment, someone will get Improved Wisdom, someone else will get Might. You can't get Might as this build, but you can get either Wisdom or Lasting Judgment. But that's really just up to your guild. The main thing is you get Holy Power, and you get Divine Favor. And this is also a really good AoE grinding build. If you just want to play Holy in a raid, you want to occasionally tank dungeons, and you want to AoE farm, then this is a really good build for that. So I think I covered everything now. If there's any questions, leave them in the comments, and I hope you liked this video, and let me know what you think.